management and litigation, human resource management to mention. But if you like, I told you, the presenters have huge CVs, but because of matters of time, allow me right now to get to Pamela Linda, and you should be listening very carefully because there are lots of...
Projecting. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with you some of the tips or guidelines in regards to our procurement process. So my discussion will be following on from Mr. on how to position yourself in terms of participation and also what the project is all about, National Supplier Database. What kind of requirements do we typically request for in a procurement round? Someone has just told me you cannot see the slides. Okay, so I'll just talk through this. The slides were just visual, I say, to help you quickly follow what I'm discussing. So my job today is to just give you a flavor of the typical procurement baseline requirements that we'll be looking at in a procurement round. So the first thing that we would need you to do is to have your profile registered on the Petroleum National Supplier Database, because as licensees, we can only work with providers, we can only award contracts to providers that are on this database. So to start with, we normally have, I would say, 4 wheels that we look at. We're looking at your technical capabilities. We're trying to establish whether you have the necessary background and capacity to do the work that we have tendered. We would also be looking at typically how compliant your company is in terms of legal and regulatory requirements. One of these, of course, is registration to the National Supplier Database, having your tax position well up to date, in other words, filing your tax returns, ensuring that all legal status of your entity is up to date, in other words, filing your all the documentation that's required for your entity. We also look at information, okay, so thank you, the slides are now showing. We would also look at typically information relating to the non-priced commercial. And what does that mean? We are looking at, one, do you understand the requirements that we've shared with you in the tender process regarding national content attainment and optimization? So we'll be looking typically at your national content plan and how well developed it is in line with the scope that we have tendered. We'll be looking at your financial status. So normally we ask you to share with us audited reports. So it's quite important that you have this all up to date to be able to participate in a procurement round sufficiently. We'll be looking to see how, what kind of financing are you having in place to support the performance of the contract. So lastly, we'll be looking at elements around pricing. Now here, of course, we're trying to understand, have you priced the scope that you've tendered well? Have you understood the payment terms, which is quite key? And do you understand the applicable taxes that pertain to the kind of scope that you have tendered, and have you applied such taxes within your pricing? So in a nutshell, this is really typically the process is not so unique in oil and gas. However, what is unique would come with the complexity of the scopes that are tendered. So I would finish off the slide by really advising to read your documentation carefully and to answer to what has been asked for. At the very last bit of that slide, I mentioned that we have electronic submissions. So it's quite key that you appraise yourself on how to use, on how to submit online bids, and we do provide the guidance for that. So the next slide, relating to the success tips along the contract execution life cycle. My job here is really to point out the typical pitfalls that we find in the bid submissions that we receive, and also the pitfalls that we actually discover along the contract execution. So I just pointed out 4 elements. It's not the only thing that really feeds into the success of you executing the contract if you do get awarded for it, but these are the main elements. So I looked at the financial planning. For me, it's it's quite key that if you have managed to win a contract, you keep an eye on your cash flow management because this is linked to the payment terms I talked about previously that we considered during the bid process. Oftentimes, poor cash flows can result in poor performance of the contract, obviously, and attract undesirable costs in the form of liquidated damages, loss of retainer fees. So it's quite key to keep an eye on that. Respect of milestones when you have been awarded the contract cannot be understated because obviously if you're not able to meet the very commitments that you awarded, it would be unfortunate for both parties. And also making sure that you maintain the right insurance policies pertaining to the risks that you've assessed at the point of award. On the succession planning, I really pointed out more to do with having a well-resourced supply organization. Why? Because I would say within the local supply market, it's not widely practiced to ensure that at all times, the quality and size of the workforce at the award is maintained throughout the execution of the contract. This is quite key, especially in the environment we're working with right now, where you can have sudden catastrophes, maybe a loss of a team member due to the current pandemic. So it's quite important that you have sufficiently experienced and trained personnel and also right competencies to carry you through the entire contract award, because this can also as well be linked to some sanctions if you cannot keep up what you committed to. On good business practices, I thought this is quite key. As Total Energies, we have, let's say, about three key principles relating to the way the business is run. And what I point out here is what's really at the heart of Total Energies. We are looking to have a project that has a low carbon print. As such, our passion to ensure that we maintain the environment that we're working in comes up front, safety and acceptable working conditions. As Total Energies, we are looking to make sure it's not only low carbon print, but we have a sustainable project and low cost oil. So we expect our suppliers to enable us achieve these objectives by respecting safety environment and acceptable working conditions during the execution of your contract, and above all, respecting the local communities that we would be working in. What does respect mean? Considering them where possible for sourcing of services, buying locally available materials and goods, but also being cognizant of the culture and respecting this, these norms, I could say, while you're conducting your business. Lastly, I talk about the third-party risk management. Here, really, what I wanted to point out is a fact. Most contractors will need to subcontract to be able to carry out sufficiently the work they've been awarded. However, very few contractors sometimes think about extending the obligations that have been clearly stipulated in the awarded contract to their subcontractors. So it's important that all make sure you understand your extended supply chain, and by extended, I mean the tier 2, 3, 4 suppliers, subcontractors that you may be using to perform your contract to ensure aspects such as, for example, ethical policies and practices are respected not only by you who was awarded the contract, but also by your extended supply chain that is supporting you to perform this contract. Thank you so much for listening to me. I have a tiny wheel I put up there as a reminder of the 3 aspects as the procurement team will look at: quality, time, and cost. And it would be quite beneficial if you keep that in mind while performing the contract. Thank you very much.
As well, that would like to, pre-qualify, or that would like to take through my documents, but I am unable informed and why actually they have not that they didn't perform well. Do you do that at Total Energies?
But it's also a regulatory requirement to have, and I would say, a more one-on-one engagement on how you can, don't hesitate to contact the procurement contacts that are in our instructions to tender documents.
Mela was very clear on compliance. Many a times when we are for your workers, you're not auditing the business, the tidbits. This compliance is as much required in, and you do not have, the capacity to carry on whatever job you are being given. Draft discussion on social media of himself. Now, what does this mean? It is not about it that pricing is very key, because all these other issues have to be encompassed in there. Now, we will be talking to one of the contractors, and we'll be speaking to Mariana Dionisio, as well as Jason Richard Williams from work, as well as the commitment to the proximity or being done within Ugandan territories right.
Good morning, and thank you. It's a privilege to be part of this morning. I'd like to just welcome both Mariana and myself. Working in supply chain here at McDermott, and Mariana looking after sustainability on this project in terms of utilizing local content, goods and services to a maximum extent possible. At McDermott, we like to start all of our sessions with a value topic, and I'd like to, not only for this project in terms of Telenga, but on all of the projects in remote locations, that essentially making sure that we're respecting people, the environment, many years. Two of the aspects that I'll just point out on make sure that all of the human rights obligations are fulfilled, not only in my case in terms of supply chain and contractual, but actually visiting and making sure that all of our sites are looking after the humanity, a real buzzword in the environment at the moment. And I did hear earlier in terms of carbon footprint management, and that will be one of the things that we will also focus on in terms of this project, is reducing as much as